A massive lion head was stuck in metal gate. What Baby did next left everyone in tears. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Riverside Wildlife Sanctuary as visitors gathered around the main viewing area, their excited chatter filling the crisp autumn air. Children pressed their faces against the safety barriers while parents fumbled with cameras, all eager to catch a glimpse of Aslan, the sanctuary's magnificent male lion. But something was terribly wrong. Baby, a golden retriever therapy dog who worked at the sanctuary alongside her handler Sarah, stood rigid at the edge of the crowd. Her usually gentle demeanor had vanished, replaced by an intensity that made the fur along her spine stand on end. She whined a low guttural sound that seemed to pierce straight through the morning's cheerful atmosphere. The massive lion's head was wedged between two metal bars of the reinforced gate that separated his enclosure from the maintenance corridor. Aslan's amber eyes rolled wildly, his breathing labored and desperate. The gate, designed with closely spaced bars to prevent exactly this kind of accident, had somehow trapped the 400-pound predator in a position that grew more dangerous with each passing minute. Dr. Marcus Webb, the sanctuary's head veterinarian, knelt beside the gate with his emergency kit, his weathered hands trembling as he assessed the situation. "We need to sedate him," he announced to the gathered staff, but his voice carried an undertone of uncertainty that made everyone's stomach clench. "But with his head positioned like this, if the tranquilizer causes him to relax too quickly, Baby's whining grew more urgent. She paced back and forth, her golden coat catching the sunlight as she moved between Dr. Webb and the trapped lion. Her brown eyes darted between the veterinarian's face and something else, something the humans couldn't see or understand. She barked once, sharp and commanding, causing several visitors to step back in surprise. "What's gotten into her?" Sarah murmured, reaching down to comfort her usually obedient companion, but Baby shook off the gentle touch, her attention fixed on Dr. Webb with an intensity that made Sarah's skin crawl. The dog's behavior was unlike anything she'd seen in their 3 years working together. The wind picked up, rustling through the amber leaves overhead and carrying with it the scent of approaching rain. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, as if nature itself sensed the gravity of the moment. Aslan's breathing grew more labored, and a collective gasp rose from the crowd as they realized the lion was weakening. Dr. Webb prepared the tranquilizer dart with practiced efficiency, but his hands shook as he loaded it into the pneumatic gun. "Everyone needs to step back," he called out, his voice carrying across the viewing area. "This is going to be very delicate." Baby's response was immediate and alarming. She barked 3 times in rapid succession, then did something that made everyone freeze. She placed herself directly between Dr. Webb and the trapped lion, her lips pulled back in a snarl that seemed impossible coming from the gentle therapy dog. Her tail was rigid, her stance protective, as if she were guarding Aslan from the very person trying to save him. "Baby, no," Sarah commanded, but the dog remained unmoved. The crowd murmured uneasily, sensing that something beyond a simple animal rescue was unfolding before their eyes. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, asking questions that no one could answer. Dr. Webb's face flushed red with frustration, and what looked suspiciously like guilt. "That dog needs to be removed immediately," he snapped, but his voice cracked on the last word. "I can't work with that, that disruption." The morning light seemed to dim as the clouds overhead thickened, casting the entire scene in an ominous gray hue. Baby's growling continued, low and steady, like a warning that only she understood. Her eyes never left Dr. Webb's face, and for the first time since arriving at the sanctuary, the respected veterinarian looked genuinely afraid. The crowd's uneasiness spread like ripples in a pond. Whispers began to circulate among the visitors and staff, their initial concern for the trapped lion now mixed with confusion about the therapy dog's unprecedented behavior. Baby had been a fixture at the sanctuary for years, known for her gentle demeanor with children and her calm presence during medical procedures. This aggressive stance was so out of character that it felt wrong, almost supernatural. "She's never acted like this," Sarah whispered to Janet, the sanctuary's assistant director, who had rushed over when word of the emergency spread. "Something's not right here." Janet nodded, her own discomfort evident as she watched Baby maintain her protective position between Dr. Webb and the lion. "Maybe she can sense that Aslan is in more distress than we realize," she suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. Even she couldn't explain the dog's specific focus on Dr. Webb, rather than the trapped animal. The veterinarian wiped sweat from his forehead, despite the cool morning air. "Look, everyone's emotional about this situation," he said, his words coming too quickly, tumbling over each other in his haste to explain away the dog's behavior. Animals can sense stress and react unpredictably, but every minute we waste, that lion is suffering more. He raised the tranquilizer gun again, but Baby's growling intensified. The sound was primal, warning, like an ancient alarm bell that spoke directly to the deepest parts of human instinct. Several children in the crowd began to cry, though they couldn't articulate why the scene frightened them so much. Dr. Webb's hand trembled more noticeably now. A bead of sweat traced down his temple, and he kept glancing around the crowd as if looking for someone or something. "I've been treating animals for 15 years, he announced, his voice too loud, too defensive. "I know what I'm doing." But Baby didn't back down. If anything, her stance became more rigid, her dark eyes fixed on the veterinarian with an intelligence that seemed almost human in its intensity. She barked once more, then did something that sent a chill through every person present. She looked directly at Aslan and Wind, a sound so filled with empathy and understanding that it seemed to bridge the gap between species. The trapped lion, despite his distress, turned his great head as much as his position would allow and looked back at Baby. For a moment, predator and domestic animal locked eyes, and something passed between them that the watching humans couldn't comprehend but could feel in their bones. "This is ridiculous," Dr. Webb muttered, but his voice shook. He lowered the tranquilizer gun slightly, and Baby's growling immediately softened to a low rumble. When he raised it again, her warning bark returned, sharp and unmistakable. Janet stepped closer to Sarah, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's like she knows something we don't." The wind picked up again, stronger now, carrying with it the first drops of rain. The approaching storm seemed to mirror the tension building in the crowd. Parents began pulling their children closer, though none of them left. There was something compelling about the scene unfolding before them, something that demanded witnesses. Dr. Webb's breathing had become shallow and rapid. He kept adjusting his grip on the tranquilizer gun, his knuckles white with tension. "The lion could die if we don't act soon," he insisted, but his words sounded hollow, as if he were trying to convince himself as much as the others. Baby's response was to step even closer to the trapped Aslan, positioning herself so that any dart aimed at the lion would have to go through her first. The golden retriever had effectively made herself a living shield, and the implications of that choice hung heavy in the air like the approaching storm clouds. Through the growing crowd, a figure emerged that most people hadn't noticed before. Lena Rodriguez, the sanctuary's night security guard who had just finished her shift. She was a quiet woman in her 50s, someone who preferred the solitude of her midnight rounds to the bustle of daytime operations, but something about the commotion had drawn her back instead of heading home to sleep. Alina watched the standoff between Baby and Dr. Webb with the careful attention of someone accustomed to observing details that others missed. During her years of night shifts, she had developed an almost supernatural awareness of the sanctuary's rhythms, its sounds, its silences. She knew when something was wrong, even when she couldn't name what it was. Baby sensed Elena's presence immediately and turned toward her, ears pricked forward with what looked remarkably like hope. The dog's tail gave a single wag, the first sign of her normal temperament since the crisis had begun. Then she looked back at Dr. Webb and barked, once, sharply, before returning her attention to Alina with an expression that seemed to say, "You understand, don't you?" Alina had spent enough years around animals to recognize intelligence when she saw it. Baby wasn't simply reacting to stress or confusion. The dog was trying to communicate something specific, something urgent. Elena's gaze shifted from Baby to Dr. Webb, noting the veterinarian's pale complexion, his trembling hands, the way he avoided making eye contact with anyone in the crowd. "Dr. Webb," Elena said quietly, her accented English carrying a note of authority that made everyone turn toward. "How long has Aslan been trapped like this?" The question seemed simple enough, but Dr. Webb's reaction was immediate and telling. He jerked as if he'd been struck, his face flushing even redder. We discovered him about 20 minutes ago. Janet called me immediately." "That's strange," Alina continued, her voice still soft but with an edge that cut through the morning air, "because I saw you near the lion enclosure at the end of my shift. That was over an hour ago." The crowd's murmur died to complete silence. Even Aslan's labored breathing seemed to quiet, as if the great cat were listening to the exchange. Baby's tail began to wag more enthusiastically, and she looked between Alina and the trapped lion with what could only be described as encouragement. Dr. Webb's grip on the tranquilizer gun tightened. I was making my morning rounds. I had checked all the animals first thing." "That doesn't mean you were alone," Alina interrupted, her dark eyes never leaving his face. And you looked upset, angry even. I almost asked if everything was all right, but you hurried away when you saw me watching. Baby barked once, a sound of approval that seemed to give Alina courage to continue. The dog moved closer to the night security guard, as if choosing sides, in a conflict that was only beginning to make sense to the human witnesses. What are you implying? Dr. Webb demanded, but his voice cracked. The tranquilizer gun shook in his hands, and for the first time, several people in the crowd began to wonder if the weapon posed more danger than protection. Elena's years of night shifts had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now, every instinct was screaming that something was terribly wrong. She looked at Baby, who sat at her side with perfect stillness, waiting. Then she looked at the trapped lion, whose amber eyes seemed to hold intelligence and pain in equal measure. I'm not implying anything, Elena said carefully. I'm asking questions. And I think Baby has been trying to ask the same questions. Haven't you, girl? The golden retriever's response was immediate and unmistakable. She stood, walked to the gate where Aslan was trapped, and began pawing at something on the ground, something that had been hidden by the crowd's shifting feet and the morning shadows. Alina knelt beside the dog and brushed away fallen leaves and debris. What she found made her blood run cold. Fresh scratch marks in the dirt, signs of a struggle, and something else, a small metal tool, the kind used to adjust the spacing between enclosure bars. The implications hit the crowd like a physical blow. This wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately adjusted the gate to create a trap, then waited for Aslan to investigate the unusual opening. But why? Elena's discovery sent shockwaves through the gathered crowd, but it was Baby who provided the next crucial piece of the puzzle. The golden retriever left Elena's side and trotted purposefully toward the maintenance shed that stood about 50 yards from the lion enclosure. Her gait was confident, determined, as if she were following a scent trail that only she could detect. Baby, wait, Sarah called out, but Alina held up a hand. Let her lead, Alina said quietly. She's been trying to tell us something all morning. Dr. Webb made a move as if to follow, but several sanctuary staff members instinctively blocked his path. The tranquilizer gun hung forgotten in his hand as he watched Baby disappear around the corner of the maintenance shed. His face had gone from red to ashen, and a thin sheen of sweat covered his forehead despite the cool morning air. Baby returned within minutes, carrying something carefully in her mouth, a manila folder that she dropped at Elena's feet. The folder was slightly damp from the dog's saliva, but the contents were still readable. Alina opened it with trembling hands, and what she found made her stomach lurch. Inside were detailed financial records, veterinary supply orders, and medication inventories. But these weren't official sanctuary documents. They were forged records, showing false orders for expensive medications and equipment that had never actually been delivered to the sanctuary. Someone had been embezzling funds, creating phantom orders and pocketing the money meant for animal care. The amounts were staggering, thousands of dollars diverted over the past 2 years. Money that should have gone toward food, medical supplies, and facility improvements had instead been stolen. But that wasn't the worst part. Elena's hand shook as she found a handwritten note tucked behind the financial documents. The writing was hurried, desperate. If anyone finds out about the missing medications, I'm finished. The inspection is tomorrow. Maybe if there's an accident with one of the big cats, they'll be too focused on that to audit the medical supplies. No one will think to check if the emergency drugs are real or expired. The note was signed with Dr. Webb's initials. Baby sat beside Alina, her golden coat gleaming in the increasingly dim light as storm clouds gathered overhead. The dog's brown eyes were fixed on Dr. Webb with an expression that seemed to combine accusation with something deeper, disappointment, perhaps, or the kind of betrayal that comes from trusted protector becoming predator. The crowd's reaction was immediate and visceral. Gasps and angry murmurs rippled through the gathered visitors and staff. Parents pulled their children closer, no longer just protecting them from a dangerous animal rescue, but from the realization that evil could wear familiar faces. Those documents could be faked, Dr. Webb said desperately, his voice rising to nearly a shout. Anyone could have planted them. That dog could have been trained to. His words were cut off by Aslan's sudden roar of pain. The lion's struggles had intensified, and it became clear that his position was becoming critical. The great cat's breathing was labored, his movements weaker than before. We need to help him now, Janet said urgently, but not with expired medication. Alina looked at the financial records again, her security training helping her piece together the timeline. The medical supplies were replaced with expired or fake versions, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. If we sedate Aslan with compromised drugs. The implication hung in the air like the approaching storm. Dr. Webb had created a perfect trap engineer, an accident that would require emergency medical intervention, then used the crisis to cover up the fact that the life-saving drugs had been replaced with worthless substitutes. Aslan's death would be attributed to complications from the rescue attempt, and the missing money would never be discovered. But Baby had sensed something wrong from the very beginning. Dogs can detect stress, fear, and deception in ways humans barely understand. She had recognized Dr. Webb as a threat not to herself, but to the innocent animal he was supposed to protect. The golden retriever walked back to Aslan's side and lay down next to the gate, close enough that the lion could see her. Despite his distress, the great cat seemed to draw comfort from her presence. Baby's tail wagged slowly, gently, as if she were trying to tell him that help was coming, real help this time. Rain began to fall in earnest now, each drop striking the ground with increasing intensity. The storm that had been building all morning was finally breaking, washing the air clean and somehow making everything that followed feel inevitable, like justice finally arriving after a long delay. The revelation of Dr. Webb's betrayal spread through the crowd like wildfire, but the immediate crisis remained. Aslan was still trapped, still suffering, and now they knew that the very person they had trusted to save him had orchestrated his predicament. The rain began to fall harder, turning the dirt around the enclosure to mud and adding urgency to an already desperate situation. Janet took charge with the decisive authority of someone who had been waiting for this moment without realizing it. "Call Dr. Sarah Chen from the County Animal Hospital," she commanded one of the staff members. "Tell her we need emergency veterinary assistance and that she should bring her own medications, all of them." But Baby wasn't finished revealing Dr. Webb's secrets. The golden retriever rose from her position beside Aslan and began pawing at a section of the gate mechanism that had been hidden from view. Alina followed the dog's lead and discovered that several bolts had been deliberately loosened, not enough to cause immediate structural failure, but enough to create a gap that would be irresistible to a curious lion. "You planned this whole thing," Alina said, her voice cutting through the sound of rain on metal. "You weakened the gate, then waited for Aslan to investigate. When he got trapped, you'd be the hero who tried to save him, except the medications would fail, and I'd be the grieving veterinarian who did everything possible." Dr. Webb finished, his voice hollow with defeat. "The investigation would focus on the mechanical failure of the gate, not the missing funds. By the time anyone thought to audit the medical supplies, I'd be long gone." The confession hung in the air like the scent of ozone before lightning. Several people in the crowd were openly weeping now, not just for Aslan's suffering, but for the betrayal of trust that cut deeper than any physical wound. This was a man they had respected, trusted with the lives of animals who couldn't speak for themselves. Dr. Webb let the tranquilizer gun fall from his hands, and the sound of metal hitting wet concrete seemed to echo through the entire sanctuary. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said, but his words sounded hollow even to himself. "I just needed the money. My gambling debts. They were going to kill me if I didn't pay." Baby approached the fallen tranquilizer gun and sniffed it carefully, then looked up at Alina with an expression that seemed almost human in its intelligence. The dog was confirming what everyone now suspected. The dart inside contained expired or diluted medication that might have killed Aslan, even if administered correctly. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the storm as Dr. Chen's emergency vehicle arrived, followed closely by police cars that Janet had wisely called when the extent of Dr. Webb's betrayal became clear. But the immediate crisis was far from over. Aslan was weakening visibly, his great head hanging at an awkward angle that made his breathing even more labored. Dr. Chen emerged from her vehicle like an angel of mercy, her emergency kit in one hand and a bag of verified medications in the other. She was a small woman with silver-streaked hair, but she moved with the confidence of someone who had spent decades saving lives that others had given up on. "How long has he been trapped?" she asked Alina, ignoring Dr. Webb entirely. "Over an hour, maybe 2, Alina replied, "and we can't trust any of our medical supplies." Dr. Chen nodded grimly and knelt beside the gate to assess Aslan's condition. Baby immediately moved to her side, but this time the dog's demeanor was completely different. Where she had growled and snarled at Dr. Webb, she now radiated calm acceptance. Her tail wagged gently as she watched Dr. Chen prepare a fresh syringe with medication from her own verified supplies. "Good girl," Dr. Chen murmured to Baby as she worked. "You knew something was wrong, didn't you?" The lion's eyes were growing glassy with exhaustion and stress. But when Dr. Chen spoke to him in the same gentle tone she used with Baby, his ears flickered forward. Even in his trapped and weakened state, Aslan seemed to recognize the difference between someone who meant him harm and someone who genuinely wanted to help. The rain continued to fall, washing away the morning's deceptions and clearing the air for what was to come. As Dr. Chen administered the sedative that would finally free Aslan from his metal prison, Baby sat quietly beside the gate, her vigil almost over, but her loyalty unwavering until the very end. The sedative took effect gradually, and as Aslan's massive frame began to relax, the true extent of his predicament became clear. Dr. Chen worked with the expertise of someone who had handled countless emergency situations, her hand steady despite the rain that continued to fall around them. The crowd watched in absolute silence, afraid to breathe too loudly lest they disturb the delicate rescue operation. Baby remained at Dr. Chen's side, no longer the fierce guardian who had confronted Dr. Webb, but once again the gentle therapy dog whose entire purpose was to comfort those in distress. She seemed to sense that Aslan was finally safe, that the real help had arrived at last. The positioning is tricky, Dr. Chen murmured as she and two sanctuary workers carefully maneuvered the lion's sedated form. But the bars didn't cause any crushing injuries. He's going to be fine. The collective sigh of relief from the crowd was audible even over the sound of falling rain. As Aslan was gently freed from the gate and laid on a transport stretcher, Baby approached the unconscious lion and sniffed him carefully, her tail wagging with what could only be described as satisfaction. Police officers had arrived and were in the process of arresting Dr. Webb, who offered no resistance. The man who had been willing to kill an innocent animal to cover up his crimes now seemed broken, diminished, as if the weight of his betrayal had finally crushed whatever humanity had remained in him. The financial records Baby found show embezzlement, going back at least 2 years, one of the investigating officers explained to Janet. We'll need to audit all the medical supplies and equipment orders, but it looks like thousands of dollars were diverted. Alina, still holding the folder that Baby had retrieved, shook her head in disgust. All that money that should have gone to caring for these animals, and he would have let Aslan die to cover it up. But Baby seemed less interested in the human drama than in the recovering lion. As the transport team prepared to move Aslan to the sanctuary's medical facility for observation, the golden retriever maintained her vigil beside the stretcher. Her brown eyes never left the great cat's face, as if she were watching for signs that he was truly going to be all right. Dr. Chen noticed the dog's attention and smiled. Despite the gravity of the situation, she really did save his life. You know, she said to Sarah. If she hadn't stopped Dr. Webb from using those compromised medications. Sarah knelt beside Baby and ran her hands through the dog's damp golden fur. I've worked with her for 3 years, and I've never seen her act like that. It was like she could sense the danger before any of us understood what was happening. Dogs have senses we're only beginning to understand, Dr. Chen replied as she monitored Aslan's vital signs. They can detect chemical changes in human sweat that indicate stress, deception, fear. Baby probably sensed Dr. Webb's guilt and anxiety. From the moment he arrived this morning, the rain began to lessen as the emergency teams completed their work. Aslan was stable and ready for transport to the medical facility, where he would spend the next few days under observation before returning to his enclosure. The gate would be repaired and reinforced, but more importantly, the sanctuary's medical supplies would be completely replaced and secured under new protocols. As the crowd finally began to disperse, many visitors approached Alina and Sarah to thank them for listening to Baby's warnings. Children who had been frightened by the morning's events now wanted to pet the brave dog who had saved the lion. Though Baby accepted their attention with the same gentle dignity she had always shown, the storm clouds were breaking apart now, allowing shafts of sunlight to pierce through and illuminate the sanctuary grounds. The crisis was over, the villain caught, and justice served. But for Baby, the real victory lay in the steady rise and fall of Aslan's breathing as he rested peacefully on the transport stretcher. 3 weeks later, the Riverside Wildlife Sanctuary held a special ceremony to honor Baby's heroic actions and to celebrate Aslan's full recovery. The great lion had returned to his enclosure with no lasting effects from his ordeal, though the sanctuary had installed additional safety measures to prevent any future incidents. Alina stood at the podium that had been set up in the main viewing area, addressing a crowd that included not only regular visitors but also reporters and officials from the county animal welfare department. Baby sat beside her, wearing a special collar that had been crafted for the occasion, a simple but elegant piece that bore the inscription "Hero" in gleaming letters. 3 weeks ago, this sanctuary faced one of its darkest moments, Alina began, her voice carrying clearly through the crisp afternoon air. We thought we were witnessing a tragic accident, but one member of our family knew better. Baby's instincts and courage not only saved Aslan's life, but exposed a betrayal that could have continued for years. The crowd applauded, but Baby seemed more interested in watching Aslan, who was visible in his enclosure, healthy and magnificent as ever. The lion appeared to recognize the golden retriever and approached the viewing barrier, a gesture that brought tears to many eyes in the audience. Dr. Chen, who had become something of a regular presence at the sanctuary since that stormy morning, stepped forward to speak about the broader implications of what had been discovered. The investigation revealed that substandard medications had been systematically replaced throughout the sanctuary's medical supplies. If not for Baby's intervention, many animals could have suffered or died from inadequate care. Sarah felt a surge of pride as she watched her companion accept the attention with characteristic grace. Baby had returned to her normal routine of therapy work, helping children overcome their fear of animals and providing comfort to visitors who needed it. But everyone who worked at the sanctuary now looked at her with a new level of respect and appreciation. The financial investigation had revealed that Dr. Webb's embezzlement totaled over $40,000, money that was slowly being recovered and returned to the sanctuary through the sale of his assets and his eventual plea agreement. More importantly, the incident had led to new protocols for medication, security, and supply chain verification that would protect not just this sanctuary but others throughout the state. Janet, who had been promoted to head director following the crisis, announced that a new position had been created. Alina Rodriguez would become the sanctuary's first director of security and animal welfare, a role that recognized her crucial intervention and her deep understanding of the facility's needs. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when the ceremony was nearly over. Aslan, who had been watching the proceedings from his enclosure, let out a single, powerful roar that seemed to echo across the entire sanctuary. Baby's ears perked up immediately, and she looked toward the sound with her tail wagging. "I think he's saying thank you," Sarah whispered to Alina, and the older woman nodded, wiping away tears that she hadn't realized were falling as the crowd began to disperse and the afternoon shadows grew longer. Baby approached the barrier of Aslan's enclosure one more time. The great lion came to meet her, and for a moment the two animals looked at each other through the protective glass. Predator and companion, wild and domestic, but united by a bond forged in crisis and sealed by trust. Alina watched the interaction with a sense of profound peace. In a world where betrayal and greed could so easily masquerade as care and protection, it was animals who had shown them the meaning of true loyalty. Baby had risked everything to protect an animal she barely knew, guided by nothing more than an instinct for justice and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right. The golden retriever finally turned away from Aslan's enclosure and trotted back to Sarah's side, ready to resume her regular duties. But everyone who had witnessed her courage that stormy morning would remember that sometimes the greatest heroes come on four legs, with golden fur and hearts full of love for creatures who cannot speak for themselves. As the sun set over the Riverside Wildlife Sanctuary, Baby curled up in her favorite spot near the visitor center, tired but content. She had done what she was born to do: protect the innocent, expose the truth, and prove that loyalty and courage could triumph over deception and greed. In the growing dusk, her golden coat caught the last rays of sunlight, marking her as what she had always been, a guardian angel disguised as a simple dog, watching over all those who needed her protection. The sanctuary was safe, Aslan was healthy, and justice had been served. For Baby, that was enough. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new visitors to comfort, and new opportunities to show the world that heroism comes in many forms. But tonight, she could rest in the knowledge that when it mattered most, she had listened to her instincts, trusted her heart, and saved a life that could not save itself. The story would be told and retold throughout the years, becoming part of the sanctuary's legend and inspiring countless others to trust their instincts when something feels wrong. But for those who were there that morning, watching a golden retriever stand between a corrupt veterinarian and an innocent lion, the memory would always carry a simple truth. Sometimes the most important voices are the ones that cannot speak with words, and the greatest courage comes from those who act not for recognition or reward, but simply because it is right.